All right, so good morning everyone. So let's get started with our session. So today we are going to talk about data types and variables. That is our discussion agenda today. Okay, we'll try to understand what is a data type, how do you define a variables, and a lot of things about them. Okay, what are the possible variables available in Scala and so on. Now, as we all know that Java and Scala are a way to program JVM, right? That means whether you write Scala code or whether you write Java code, at the end of the day, they get converted into byte codes, and those byte codes will be processed by your JVM. We know this. So if we look into Java, right, so we have data types, like we have 8 data types, right? Boolean, okay, byte, right, sort, char, integer, float, long, double. Okay, so there are 8 data types in Java. Like we have boolean, byte, sort, char, int, float, long, double, and the sizes are 1 byte, 2 bytes, 4 bytes, 8 bytes. Right, so that's how they are basically designed. Okay, now in Scala we do not have any such data types like this. Okay, because everything is objects, right? Everything is classes and objects. So instead what we have is we have the class, like we have a boolean class, we have byte class, we have integer class, and so on. We'll talk about that, okay, in detail. So in Scala, we have insert class, and if you want to use this class, you have to create the object of it and then use it, right? So that's how basically Scala works. Now one thing to understand here is, since all these are your classes, right? So the operator, whatever you are using, plus, minus, into, divide, whatever, right? So all these operators are basically functions, and we have just discussed that in our last class at a very high level, but we have not seen them practically, right? So data types are basically these, right? So we'll talk about all the data types whatever is available in Scala. Okay, now before I move to that, I want to get into this variable. Okay, we will talk about that in detail, but let me get into the variables. So what is a variable, guys? Variables are nothing but a way to hold a memory, right? So let's say let's talk about your program execution, right? So whenever you write a code and when you say run your program, what happens is the program gets loaded into your memory and they would be executed by your CPU, the codes, right? So if I talk about memory, we are talking about RAM. Okay, if we talk about memory, we are basically talking about RAM. So what happens is these variables are a way to allocate some memory here, right? To allocate some block of memory here, and these variables in Scala are basically in Scala the variables are basically I would say denoted by two things. One is val and another one is var, right? So val and var. So what is a val? Val is basically value and var means actually variable. Okay, what is the difference between these two? Let us try to understand. Okay, so var means it is a variable which are mutable. These variable, right? So variable means something which can be changed, whose value can be changed, so they are called as mutable. And val means they are basically something, okay, which are immutable. That means if you want to define a constant in Scala, you should basically use val. Okay, and if you want to define something whose value can be changed repeatedly, then you can define var. Okay, so let's understand this with an example. So the examples can be something like this. Let's say I want to define a variable. I'll say val I is equal to 10, right? So I said val I is equal to 10, which means I'm defining a constant variable called I, whose value would be 10. So what will happen is in memory, right? In memory, a box would be created. A box would be created. This box would basically store 10, right? And its name or its reference is I, right? So I just a name to identify this area, right? To access this this particular memory location, right? Now the thing is, since this I is val, you cannot again write I is equal to 5. You cannot do this, right? You cannot do this. Why? Because your I is a constant. It's not it. But if I say val, if I say where j is equal to 10, right? This is not required. If you say where j is equal to 10, then you can obviously say j is equal to 12. Okay, because j is a variable. So when you say well I is equal to 10, what happens? A memory would be allocated. This 10 would be inserted in it, and this would be pointed to by I. Okay, and this I is a constant variable. That means the value of I is fixed and it cannot be changed again. But if you do this, then what will happen? The first line would say, okay, give me another box and let the box store 10, and this box would be identified by a reference j, right? But then tomorrow I can go and say, in the next line I can say j is equal to 12. So what will happen? This 10 would be replaced by 12, right? So you can update the value of a variable, but you cannot update the value of value. This is a very fundamental concept in Scala, and I believe if you know a little bit of Scala, you know this already, right? But then I just wanted to tell you this as well. So another question would be, why do they have both val and var, right? Do we really need both of them? Yes, you need both of them. For example, if you are working, if you're using any sort of loops, right, which will keep on rotating, and you want the value to be updated. For example, let's say I have a list of numbers, right? So I'll say list of numbers, and you would like to find out the sum of all the numbers. So, right? So I'll say I have a list with 5, 7, 3, 1, 2. Right? So this is my list, and I want you to write a program, a small program which can sum these numbers, right? And let's assume you have chosen the typical for loop approach, okay? Typical for loop approach to do this work. Of course, you can use some other technique also, which we discussed last time, but we'll see that in detail. But let's say you decided to go ahead with this approach, for loop approach, okay? In this case, you cannot define val total, right? Because if you do that, then what will happen is this, you will not be able to use this again and again, right? And then what is the requirement? The requirement is demanding you to have a variable whose value you can update every time. So you should basically say var, right? Total is equal to 0, that's okay. And you keep saying total is equal to total plus these numbers, right? Area of I, right? So likewise, you will basically need a variable, right? So wherever there is a loop, wherever you feel I have a requirement wherein I have to constantly update the value of a particular variable, then please go ahead with the variable, okay? But the best practice of Scala is always prefer using val no matter what, okay? So that's what you should basically focus on. Now I'll move on. I'll just go through my notes, because the notes covers a lot of things and I really don't want to miss anything out of it. So we'll look into the notes and we'll get started with the notes. So Scala does not have a primitive data type. We will be using classes like Boolean, byte, etc. to represent the data type. We'll talk more about it. They have same memory structure as of Java, since they get converted to Java data type behind the scene, right? So no matter you are using a Java type of, no matter you are writing a Java, classes, or you're writing a Scala classes, both the data type, whatever you are using either on Java or in Scala, are internally same representation. So variables, we understood that they are reserved memory location for storing values. In Scala, we use var or and val to represent the memory allocation, right? So if you see this code, it says, in case of Java, you basically write like this, int x equal to 10 with a semicolon, okay? Whereas in Scala, you will say variable x is equal to 10, okay? Where y is equal to 20, val z of integer equal to 30. Let's look into this, okay? So I'll practically what we'll do is we have already installed Scala 3. Okay, so I'll just go ahead, terminal, right? So I'm here in my Scala 3, right? So let me quit. So when you say terminal, you get this, and I'll just say Scala, right? So this will take us to Scala prompt, done. And what we can do is we can execute some sort of code here till we don't get introduced to IntelliJ. Okay, so we'll do a couple of classes in like the terminal itself, and then once we are comfortable, we'll pick up our IntelliJ, and then we'll start doing a lot of things in IntelliJ. Okay, so let's move on. So the first command is val x is equal to 10, right? So what does it do? It will basically create a variable, right? A value, a constant variable, I will say. Okay, so when I say variable, it does not mean that it's just var. Okay, when I say variable, it could be val or it could be val. Okay, so it is basically creating a variable called x, which would be a constant, right? And then it has stored 10 in it. Done. Now if I say x plus equal to 5, so what it is saying, x plus equal to 5 is not allowed. Okay, because they are not present, because like you cannot do this on the variable. Okay, sorry, you cannot do this on the value. Now let us try to say x is equal to 10, x equal to 15, I'll say, right? X equal to 15. Now it is saying reassignment to value x is not allowed, right? And why it is saying not allowed? Because it's a value, right? So value means constant, and if you have defined it once, then you are not allowed to change the value again to something else. Okay, now I'll go with the next. I'll say variable y is equal to 20. Variable y is equal to 20. So if I say variable y is equal to 20, then what does it mean? It means I want to create a variable called y whose value would be 20, but then I want this y to be, I just want this y to be, allowed to reassignment anytime, right? So if at all I want to increment the value of y, I should be able to do that. So if I say y is equal to 15 now, right? So it works, and the y value is updated. So variable are basically something on which you can constantly add or delete or whatever you can do, right? So we'll constantly update the value of this variable, right? But if you do with val, then it is not allowed, because val is always constant. Okay, so now there is a recommendation: always prefer to use val over a variable, unless and until the situation demands you that you should go with variable, right? Please always use val, a constant, right? It is hard to debug the code when you have a variable that gets changed anytime. This is the biggest problem with the Java, because in Java, mostly what we do, of course, you could have always said final and then and constant, to create a constant out of it. But then most of the time, what happens, you have a variable, you inserted that variable into a method somewhere, right? A reference, and then internally you have done some modification and you are clueless. The developer is clueless what happened next, right? So that's the biggest challenge in Java. So in Scala it says, hey, as much as possible, always try to use value over variables. Okay, use variable for local variables, loops, and so on, but use value whenever you feel its value should not be modified anywhere. Anytime you feel I want a way wherein the data type value cannot be updated anymore, please go ahead and use val. Okay, now if we talk about variables, when I say variables, that means variable as well as value. Okay, so it means both. So if we talk about variables, the variables can be used in 3 different places. Okay, let's talk about that as well. We want to talk about the type of variables. Where exactly, what are the different type of variables you can have, right? So the discussion is type of variables. And as I said, if I'm saying variable, that means val as well as var together. Okay. Number 1, you can have variable as instance variable. Okay. Number 2, you can have a variable called local variable or block variable. Okay. Number 3, you can have variable called method parameter variable, right? So instance variable, you can have local variable or block variable, or you can have method and parameter variable. What are those? Let's try to understand this. Okay, so instance variables are basically the properties of a class. Generally what happens when you write a Java program or Scala, one or other way you write a class, right? So inside the class you put all your stuff, right? So when you have a class X, okay, now you may be interested to write some variables here, right? So let's say when X is equal to 10, right, and where Y is equal to 20, right? So these two are basically what? Class label, right? So it's basically written just inside your class. So we call this instance variable. Okay, so we call it instance variable. An instance variable can be val or it can be var as well, right? So I'll just refer my notes. Although I'm not sharing the screen right now with you guys, but I'll just refer the notes so that I don't miss any important point. That's very important. So field labels are also called as object variable or instance variable. These are field label variables. Okay, you call it field label as well. Okay, so these are called as object variables or instance variables. They are accessible from inside of every method of the object. So if you have these variables can be accessed from anywhere, right? So if I have a function here, def m1, so let's say this is a function. Okay, we will talk about how to write a function and all, don't worry about this, but let's say this is a function. Now this function can actually access these variables, right? And these variables, since they are written just inside your class, they can be accessible from anywhere, right? They can be accessible from anywhere throughout the class. Okay, now these variables can be a mutable or immutable. It could be a constant like val. It could be a dynamic variable which can keep changing like var, right? So that's the property of an instance variable. Let's talk about the local variable now. The local variables or block variables. Okay, now what are they? These variables are those variables which are defined inside your blocks or methods. Okay, for example, I may say I have written a main method. Okay, def main, and you say args array of string. So don't worry about this. We will talk about this, right? But they are basically the Java main method. Okay, so inside a class X, you basically inside your object, you will basically have to say object. Don't get confused, guys. Okay, because this is just a day one, and our main object is not to learn all this stuff. Okay, so we'll talk about this later. So def main arg array of this. So this is how you basically write a main method, right? Now inside this main method, what I want to do is I want to declare a variable val x is equal to 10, right, and where y is equal to 20, right? So this variable is called as a local variable. Why is it so? Because they are local to a main method. They are local to a main method. Okay, and sometimes you may end up writing some sort of loop. Okay, loop, and inside the loop you may put some sort of variables, right? So if you see, this is a loop. Okay, this is not a method, but this is a loop. But then can I say this is basically a block? Yes, I can say that, right? So this is a block. So if you write anything inside the block, any variable you define inside this block, they are called as a block variable. Okay, so that's the reason I have kept it together, local variable or block variable. Whatever you write inside a method or whatever you write inside a block, they are called as a block variable or local variables. Okay, now so local variables are defined inside a block or method or a block. They are accessible only within that method where it is defined. So if I have defined a variable x equal to 10, this x can be accessible only till here, only from here to here, right? It cannot be accessible from outside because it is a local variable. Okay, similarly inside this loop, if you have defined a variable, let's say value x equal to 20, then this value cannot be accessed from outside. It can be accessible only from this passage to this passage, because that is the scope of of this particular variable. Okay, scope means where exactly it can be recognized, right? So since it is a local variable, this can be recognized only within the loop. Okay. Now, however, if you return the value from a method to a caller, then its value is passed outside. So, for example, let's say I have a method, say find square. Okay, so let's say def square, and I'll say I'll get num of int type. Okay, and I'll say result, well, result is equal to num into num, right? So what I did is I have just defined a variable called square. I have just defined a method called square, and this square can take one argument, and that is just number. And out of this argument, what it could do, it can basically calculate the result for you, num into num. So if somebody assigns 5, then it would become 5 into 5, 25, and then I'll be basically returning this result. Okay, I would be basically returning this result. So when I'm returning this result, what it does is it will basically return the result back to the caller, right? So now understand here, this result is basically what? A local variable. Okay, but as we know that you cannot access this variable from outside of this block, right? Because it is defined within your square method. So within your square, you have defined a variable called result, and this is basically a value or variable, whatever, right? And then they are local variables, and since it is a local variable, you cannot access this result from outside, right? So from outside you cannot say result, you will not be able to get them. But however, if you're returning the value, this value, somebody would catch it, is not it? So probably in your main method, here in the main method, what you would be doing is you would basically say call the square method by passing 5. Okay, by passing 5, and what you'll get a result. So I'll say val output. Okay, val output. So when you do this val output equal to square of 5, what happens? It basically calls this method by passing 5. 5 is passed, the expression is evaluated, 5 into 5 became 25. That 25 is stored in a result, temporary variable result, and then the value of the result is returned, and OP would get 25. Okay, OP would get 25, but then see, this is not accessible. You cannot say I want to access this result because the scope is not available. But since you're returning the value, you can cache those values and use it in your other logic, right? So that is what I wanted to tell you when I say, however, if you return the variable from a method to a caller, then its value is passed outside. Okay, it can be both mutable as well as immutable and can be defined using val or var. So these local variables can be value. These local variables can be a variable, and you can use them as per your requirement. Okay. Now I'll move to the next type of variable, that is a method parameter variable. Okay. So what is a method parameter variable? This is called as a method parameter variable. Okay. The variable which are available, which you write inside your method while defining a method. These are called as a method level variables. Okay. Another thing is these variables have a scope only within this whole method, right? Because this variable is defined for a method. So the scope of this variable would be only till this method, It's not it. Now these variables cannot be a var. It is always constant. It is always var by default. You cannot change it to var, because that's how the Scala is designed. The Scala says all the parameters whatever I pass to a method would be always always val, a constant value, and you cannot really change this out inside. You cannot say num is equal to num plus 2. You cannot say, because this is a method level variable and they are always constant, and they are designed in a way so that you cannot go ahead and you don't go ahead and then change the value of it, okay, by doing some ding dong. So that's the whole agenda. Scala did not wanted this like method level variables to be used inside and then be updated or modified, and that's the reason they are completely immutables. Okay, so that's what I wanted to just talk about the variables. There are three type of variables, three type of places where you can define the variables. One is at the top, class level, another one is method level or block level, and third one is your method parameters. So now we'll talk about the variables and expressions. Let's try to understand if you can write some expressions, how do you write an expression, and how exactly Scala can help you to write more complicated expressions. Okay, so I'll just share my screen to help you with the details. Okay, so we are now going to talk about the variables and expressions. You can write the expression block where your logic will be executed and the final output would be assigned to a var. So look into this example. So if you see, this example looks little messy, right? But then what I'm trying to tell you is this is possible in Scala. Okay, so when you can say, well, average is equal to, you write within a block, this is a block, okay, because it's just a braces, it's a block. Now in the block, what you're doing, you're saying, well, m1 is equal to 50. You have defined mark 1 is 50, you've defined mark 2 70, and you've defined mark 3 80. And all these are what? Values, right? They are constants. So within a block, you have defined a constant values. And then you are saying m1 plus m2 plus m3. So adding all the marks by 3 dot to float. Okay, so what does it do? It will say 50 plus 70 is 120, right? 120 plus 8 is 80 is 200. 200 by 3 is 66.66, right? So that's what you have done. You have defined some values here, right? And you did some operations, and finally the expression, whatever you have written, the final expressions would be evaluated, and this would be assigned back to your average. So at the end of this statement, the value of your average would be how much? Would be 66.66. Okay, so I'll just copy this and let me take it up here in my terminal. So I'll just say paste, right? So hit enter. Now if you look into this, it says, well, average equal to, and then you have written your expression here within a block, right? So you can write this kind of expressions wherein you can have a lot of logic, and finally you can say, okay, I'm done with my expression and I want my final output to be this, right? Now let's look into one more example here. Look into this, what I've done. So if you see, this is basically a nested expression. What we are actually trying to do here is we are trying to evaluate them. Okay, so what would be the output finally when I execute this expression? Let's try to see this. The output is 5, and let's understand this, how the output became 5 here. So see here, you are saying, well, v is equal to, I don't know. Okay, I'll be evaluating the expression, and then the expression starts from here, right? And then you are saying well, a is equal to 1. So you have defined a variable, right? You have defined a variable a is equal to 1. Now this variable would have a scope till this closing curly braces, which means till the end. Okay, so till the end. So let me write it on the board, okay, because that will help us to understand it more better. All right, so let's look into this example. We'll try to understand what would be the output of this expression. Okay, so in this case, what we have done, see here, well, v is equal to a block. So this block started from here to here, right? So the scope of this block got started from here to here. Within this block, I have defined a variable, I have defined a constant value, a is equal to 1. So I got a whose value is equal to 1. Done. Next, after that, I started another block which starts from here and goes till here. Okay, now this a is equal to 1 is accessible till here, guys. Okay, a is equal to 1 is accessible till here. You can even go and say print a, then it will give you 1. So the value of this, right? So this a variable or value, whatever you define here, would be accessible till the scope of this guy, right? And then the scope of this is here. That means you can print your a till here. Okay, but then I'm going inside this. So again, I have a braces, another block. Now I'm saying, well, b is equal to a into 10. So see here, this a is defined here, which means it will be available throughout this block, right? And hence you will be able to use this here as well. So I'm saying a is equal to b equal to a into 10. So 1 into 10 would become 10. So b would be 10. Okay, so b would be 10 here, right? Now the value of this b is defined here in this scope here, right? And till where it can be accessed, b would be accessible till here. B would be accessible till here. Your a would be accessible. Your a would be accessible till here. Okay. Now again, I again started one more block. So this is another block, right? Within this block, we have defined well c is equal to b by 2. So what is this b? Now b is already 10. So 10 by 2 is 5. So c is equal to 5, right? And now, can I access a here? Yes, you can, right? You could have written c is equal to b into a by 2. That would also have been a good idea. Okay, so c is a variable which we have defined here, right? Here, right? And then it will fall under this scope, right? So c would be accessible only here, right? And then what are you doing is you are finally returning c. So when you just write an expression, you don't have to use a return keyword in Scala. Okay, we will talk about that. But now what you did is you evaluated the expression, and what the value of this expression? 5. So 5 you are returning, and this 5 whatever you are returning would be returned back. Okay, so see here, this block is returning you 5. This block is returning you 5. So can I say I can cancel this whole operation and just replace that with 5, because this whole expression is evaluated to 5. Okay, and then if you look into this, right, now if I remove this, then I have only 2 lines, 1 line and second line, right? So 2 lines. So because I have evaluated already and I have seen that it basically is going to give me 5. So now this block has only 2 lines, this and second is 5. Because the last line is 5, hence this would be evaluated to 5. So you can also cancel this out and just write 5. Okay, now I can erase this whole completely and I have just 5. Now again I have a like the outer block wherein I have only 2 expressions. One is value equal to 1 and then the second expression is 5. Okay, so now this also can be cancelled out and just replaced with 5, and that's how v becomes 5. That's what you can do with the expressions. The expressions can be nested, the expressions can be complicated, right? So that's what I wanted to tell you here, that if at all you have a requirement to write little complicated expressions, then you can definitely do that. Like just use a curly braces, start writing, and whatever is you are writing at the end, that would be written back, that would be propagated back, and then you can catch it out here like saying well v equal to 5, and then your job is done. So whenever you are writing a complicated expression, always remember that the last statement, okay, the last statement whatever you have written would always be written back. Okay, so you'll be like encountering this many times as we move on with the program. So let's move on. So now I'll talk about assigning multiple variables in a single line. Okay, so I'll again share my screen. Assigning multiple variables in a single line. So suppose you have a requirement that I want to I want to assign 3 variables, but then I don't want to write it in 3 different places. Okay, that is also can be done. And look into this, how can you do this? Okay, I'll look into my screen. It says this is how you will be basically create 3 different variables or values. Okay, and you can just assign them in the same order. Okay, so let me go ahead and then write it out. So look into this. Okay, what I did is I said well name of string type, age of int type, and cell of float type is equal to tuple 3 suraz 29 5000f. We'll talk about this tuple. Okay, but then what are we doing is we are basically returning 3 consecutive elements. This tuple 3, when you write, what it does, it basically stores these 3 consecutive elements to suraz 29 and 5000f. And these 3 variables I'm assigning it to name, age, and salary respectively with a val, right? So that's what we have done. Now the same thing can also be written like this. Okay, what I've done is I have removed that tuple keyword from here. It's the same thing otherwise, right? So if you see, I've just removed this tuple3 keyword, tuple3 class from here, and then it's otherwise same. So let's enter, and if you see, they are also giving you the same output. Name is assigned Suraj, age is assigned 29, and salary is assigned 5,000. Okay, now again you can also do the same thing again like this. So I have removed the types. I am saying Suraj 29 5000F, and what are they? They are basically a tuple. Okay, they are internally a tuple, and tuple means what? Storing a consecutive data together. Okay, it's not an array. We'll talk about the difference later. But then look into this. So we have 3 elements back to back, and then we wanted to assign them like this, and let's say enter. Right. So if you see, it is also able to inject them properly, and it was able to determine the type of it, right? By looking at this string, by looking at this data, it understood that Suraj should be a string and 29 should be an integer, and then 5000F should be a float by looking into this F. So that's how you will be basically assigning your variables. Now, what is a tuple? Okay, so let's talk about this tuple. Okay, so right now we will just talk about a small introduction to tuple, but we will be looking that later as a separate topic as well. Okay, so if you have a requirement to put some of the data together, then you basically use a tuple. For example, let's say I have 3 things like employee name, right, then age, and then salary. I want to store these 3 piece of data together. What you could do is, mostly the Java folks would say create a class with 3 properties and then save it. But then why to create a class just for storing all these 3 elements, right? So you can say, okay, I would use a tuple, right? And then tuple starts with braces, small parentheses like this, and you'll say Suraj is 32, my real age, okay, salary 5000F, right? So this will basically do what? This will basically create a small collection, okay, a small collection of 3 elements, right? And they are not a collections like list or map. It is tuple. Tuple is different, okay? So it will be able to store these 3 information, and then you can easily assign it to a variable. You can say val data like this. Okay, so what happened is you are able to hold 3 different values in a same variable, and that's what you do using tuple. Okay, can you give me a real-time requirement? Suppose you have a method called get details. Okay, suppose you have a method called get details wherein you pass some employee ID, right? And then you do some operation here, and you would like to return some of the informations of an employee, and that could be, say, employee name, employee salary, right, and employee age, right? Now, if you are a Java guy like me, right, how would you make your method returning 3 variables, three different values? Practically not possible. Practically not possible, right? But then there are certain approaches. Number 1 approach would be, you may say, okay, to store these values, let me create a class, okay, class data, whatever, with these 3 properties, getter and setter method, whatever, and I'll create the object of this class and I'll return it back. I really appreciate that. But then you are again spending a lot of time writing a classes and doing all those stuff, right? Which may not be a great idea. Okay, because at the end of the day, I just have a requirement to return 3 objects, three values, right? It's not a great idea. Okay, so we said, okay, this we will not do. Next, you may say, okay, what I'll do is maybe in an array, in an array. I'll create an array and I'll keep them 0, 1, 2 like this, right? So if you can still do that, but then the problem would be it's really not a great idea to use just an array, right? Because you use an array, then it becomes an index based 0, 1, 2. It becomes just an index based. That is also gone. Okay, and then you'll have to create an array and then do all those stuff. Next, you may say, hey, why don't I use a map? I'll create a map, right? And I'll say employee name and the name, the original name, whatever, I'll store it here. I have fetched it from the database or whatever, and then I'll also put the other one, employee salary 5,000, right? And employee age, let's say 32, right? And likewise, I'll create this map and then I'll just do a put, and then I'll just return this map. My work is done. And trust me, I've done this many times when I was working on Java projects. I've done this many times. But again, the problem is you're creating a lot of maps and all. Can it not be so simple, right? That is what I'm trying to tell you now here. Now what we will do is we'll say, okay, we are in Scala, right? So I'll say Suraj 32 and 5,000. Done. I'll just return this. Okay, I don't have to take a trouble of creating an array, right, and putting array of 0 equal to this, array of 0, 1 equal to this, array of this equal to this. I'll just write it like this. I don't have a trouble of creating a map dot this, put, and then you'll go ahead in the caller, and then you have to again, check has key, this key, that key, and whatnot. So cannot the life be simple? Scala says, yes, I have something called tuple. Use tuple and store the value whatever you want to. Okay. Done. Now once you're done that, now you can access this value like this, data._1 to access the first element, ._2 to access the second element, ._3 to access your third element. That's how you will be basically able to access the elements from a tuple. Okay, it looks very similar to, now see, the problem with an array is also one thing. The problem with an array is you have to create an array of object type, because there are different types, right? Suraz 32 and 5,000. They are different types: string, integer, and float. Right. So a homogeneous array would not work. You have to say array of object type. That is the only way you can deal with that. But better than that, I feel this is a great solution. Write your method, and if you feel that you have a requirement of returning more than one variable, use a tuple and return it back. And in the caller you will catch it, and then that's how it is done. Let's move on. So tuple, it is a class that can be used to hold collections of different type. In Scala 2, we have tuple 1 to tuple 22. If you are already familiar with Scala, you might know that in Scala you are allowed to have tuple 1 to tuple 22. And what are those? So see, in this case, what we have done is we have stored 3 elements in these branches, is not it? So we call it a tuple 3. Okay, tuple 3 means a tuple which can store only 3 elements. Okay, tuple 3 means tuple which can store only 3 elements. I can have tuple 22. I can have till tuple 22, which means in this braces, how many value you can store, how much data you can store, that is 22. Okay, so in Scala 2.x, the limitation is your tuple can have only 22 versions. They have only 22 versions, which means in any tuple, at max you can store only 22 elements. The moment you try to store 23rd element, it will not work, right? That is what you have in Scala 2. But the good news is, right? But the good news is in Scala 3, the tuple can store more than 22. That rule of 22 is gone in Scala 3. Okay, and that is what earlier, I was still, like thinking about what should I even answer to my student if they say, hey, what is the reason of exactly using 22? To be very honest, I don't know the reason, because that could be a design decision from people, but I really have no good reason why 22 and why not 23, right? And so on. So now in Scala 3, you don't have that problem. It has taken care of removing this 22. So you can have more elements in this in the Scala 3. Okay. Now let's move on. So we'll do some practical on this, and then we'll stop. So let me share my screen. Okay, so look into this. All this tuple n yeah, so Scala 3 has lifted that limitation and now allows you to go beyond your 22. All these tuple n classes are present in Scala package and they extend product n classes. So this tuple 1, tuple 2, tuple 3, tuple 4, they are present in your Scala package. We'll look into the API documentation as well, okay? Now, suppose I want to do this. Okay, so let me say, let me go here. Control L, paste, right? So what I'm saying vel t is equal to 1 2 3 4 5 23. So I'm trying to store 23 elements in a tuple, okay? And it works just because my Scala version is 3, okay? Now I can say t dot underscore 1. So they have done little more changes, looks like, guys. So it says you are allowed to access the element like of 1. They have, I think they have made it a 0 index based now. So I'll say 2. Yeah, I'll say 0, right? So they are allowing us to access the element like this, right? But then in Scala 2, you had to write t dot underscore 1 underscore 2 underscore 3. Okay. Now what we'll do is, let us try to check that as well. Okay, now I have already installed Scala 3. So what you can do is, probably you can go to this website. Okay, probably you can go to this website wherein you can see this is basically a online editor. Okay, so ksd.scala-lang.org. This is an online compiler wherein you can change your compiler and then see you can work with the different versions. Okay, so now what I'll do is, I'll go to my builder settings and check it out. I have Scala 2 here. Okay, I have Scala 2 here, and 2.13 is what I'm actually using. So I'll go back to my editor now. Okay, now let us try to do the same thing. Remember, we are using Scala 2. Okay, so I'll say I'll just say, well, t is equal to, now you can start writing 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 elements, 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 should be good, 21 22 should be good. Okay, so I've just defined a tuple with 22 elements and it should not have any issues. Okay, now I'll just say println t, right? And just click on this button, play button. Okay, so when I played this and it said, okay, see the output is 1 to 22. That means it is successfully working. And let me say 23. Okay, and let's say run again. Right, now it is saying tuples may not have more than 22 elements, but 23 is given. That's the problem. Okay, because you are using Scala 2 here, and Scala 2 says the maximum limit is tuple 22. Now I'll say, okay, let me correct this out. I'm in 22, right? Now what I'll say, dot underscore 1. Okay, so I'm saying give me the first element out of it. Right, now if you see, the first element is 1, and that's the reason you got the element here. Let me write 10. Okay, the first element, let the first element be 10, let the second element be 12, and let the third element be 33. Okay, and I'll say t dot underscore 1 run, it should give me 10. Right, if I say t dot underscore 2, then it should give me 12. Right, if I say t dot underscore 3, then it should give me 1 2 3 33. Okay, so this is how you will basically access the element on your Scala 2. But what we have understood from here is, in Scala 3, they don't allow you to access the variables like this, right? So this is allowed in Scala 2. In Scala 3, it is saying we have made it a 0-based index. So I'll be uploading my document wherein I'll put the point that we have. Okay, now let me move on. So having said that, you know, like now you will not be able to use this in Scala 3. You'll have to say items of 0, right? If you say I want to access the first element, you will have to say items of 0, and that should give you 5. This would be on Scala 2 and this would be on Scala 3, right? So wherever you said dot underscore this, now you'll have to replace this with what? The index, and indexes are 0-based. right? So, all right. So I think we are good to stop here, and let me take up your questions, and then let's close the session for today. So if you see, we've just completed only 2 pages or 3. We've just completed 2 pages, right? So that's the detailing. So if you just look into the number, it's only 15 pages, but understanding all these things step by step, line by line, and all would really take a lot of time.